Right, let's get into it. So welcome to the monthly sync. I'm KJ. I lead the account management team at Hook, and today we are tackling one of the most overused and least explained phrases in customer success. Be more strategic. I'm sure every CSM has heard it. Most have nodded along. Very few really know what it means or have been told what it means. So that's what we're doing today. No buzzwords or theory, just real opinions from two people who live in this stuff every day. So I'm joined by two powerhouses who bring this perspective on this topic. Someone who lives and breathes strategic enterprise CS at one of the most iconic software companies in the world, and someone who's built and scaled world-class CS from the leadership seat. Katie and Brian, would love you to introduce yourselves for the attendees and then we can get stuck in.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Denny, Senior Customer Success Manager at Adobe. I'm thrilled to be here today. I think this really is an important topic. If we look at all the innovation that's happening right now in AI, being strategic, it's not just a nice to have anymore, is it? We have to help our customers cut through all the noise and make sure that we are communicating the value that we bring. So it's a super important topic, and I'm glad to be here.
Hey everybody, my name is Brian Hackett. I lead the customer success team in EMEA for Canva. I've been at Canva 4 years, but before that, I have a very checkered background. I worked in brand marketing and CPG. I worked in brand strategy and design before landing in tech. So yeah, I have some opinions on stuff. But yeah, really excited because strategy is like or being strategic with all the AI tools and allegedly less admin that we have to do. It's becoming more and more important to be strategic in this role. So excited to chat about it today.
Fabulous, and looking forward to hearing all of those opinions too. So let's start with the uncomfortable truth. Be more strategic gets thrown around constantly, but it means something different to everyone who says it. So would love to start by defining it. Katie, what does it actually mean to you?
Sure. In the very basic terms, if I were to reframe what it doesn't mean, it's not reactive. It's not reductionist in thinking and working in isolation. If I look earlier in my career, I would tend to answer questions that a customer would ask me very quickly and try to move on to the next question, without taking that pause and to understand how they've come to that question, why, where the question and what they're trying to do fits within the bigger business objectives. And I'd say now I'm much more looking at the bigger picture, and when a question comes in, expanding the conversation. So how can we look at the wider opportunity, bringing in different points of view and challenging the customer as well. So I think going from being small to bigger minded thinking is one of the ways you can be strategic.
Great, thanks. Brian, what does being strategic mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's one of those words that is a bit of a chameleon word. It means lots of different things to different people. You know, if you hear from your manager, like it could mean elevating customer relationships. It could mean just grow the account. It needs to be bigger, more money, do more stuff, do what I told you. It could be about being a bit maverick or rigidly following the playbook that you were given. How we tend to define it at Canva is like it's the impact that you drive on a customer and the ROI that leads to long-term partnerships. And how you go about achieving that is how you be strategic. But that could be different things at different points in the customer life cycle, whether they're coming out of implementation or at the end of a 2 year renewal cycle. It completely depends. So you need to be aware of where the customer is at and where you are in the customer journey.
And this is an interesting thing that you've brought up around like are you being a maverick or are you rigidly following a playbook? And I think you hear lots of different opinions there, right? Like follow the playbook, build the habits, the results will follow. And on the other end, you hear ditch the playbook, kind of obsess over your customer, trust your gut, and then the results will follow. If that's a spectrum, where do you both land on that spectrum? Brian, I'll come to you first.
I think yeah, it's I got a piece of advice from a senior leader recently, well not recently, last year or so, and it's like it's this Katie mentioned it, it's like being reactive versus being responsive. So like being reactive is like being super quick to answer that email and like being responsive to your customer and almost like, CS in the past is more of a support function and fixing problems and escalating it directly to the manager. We have a problem with a big account and you can react emotionally quite stressfully. Whereas being
Mhm.
responsive, you can acknowledge an issue quickly, you can clarify the next steps, you can see how you can do a bit of a judo flip on it and turn it into a strength. So like it depends on what's coming in, but if you try and be that responsive versus reactive, I think you can walk that spectrum pretty well.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think it depends on where you are in the maturity of either the product life cycle or your customer relationship. So I like to think of it in the build phase when you have a new product that's launching. It's helpful to have a framework. It's helpful to have the playbook so that you're level setting everyone on your team to get the upskilling required, how they're all going to position the new product in market, building that confidence as well. But over time, you need to be able to, like when you get to the scale phase, pick and choose what makes sense for your customer, layer in the vertical knowledge you have, layer in the industry insights of what use cases or how that product fits your customer set. So I think there's definitely phases. And then same thing with a relationship. When you have a new customer relationship, it's helpful to have the weekly communication cadence, the strategic business reviews as like that milestone, your account plan, and that sets the tone. It sets confidence. It sets the trust in the relationship. Over time, though, business starts to go really fast, right? And it might not be the best use of your time to spend 3 hours on a strategic business review. You might need to be a little bit more ad hoc, dynamic, and then move more towards ruthlessly focusing on the customer's needs. But then, even then, once the pendulum gets that far, you need to be careful because if you focus too much then on the customer, it can be a bit of a danger because they don't always know what's best for them. And they also don't always know what they don't know. So, yes, definitely frameworks helpful in the early stages, but then you need to be able to be dynamic and pivot.
It's super interesting because you've talked a lot there about how you use your time effectively. And something that comes up again and again in CS is this reactive versus strategic piece. Katie, do you think that kind of reactive work is almost a prerequisite for earning the right to be strategic? Does reactive work have a place in being a strategic CSM?
Think they absolutely go hand in hand. And the analogy I often to test myself where I'm at in that because it can be dangerous for us all. But the analogy I like to see is that as a CSM, we are the architect of our accounts. It's our job to build the vision, the art of the possible, the blueprints of where we want to go and be that thought leader. But you can only do that if your foundation's right. So if you start to see all the leaky faucets, the plumbing issues and problems on the foundational levels, in the form of like support tickets and escalations type of thing. Obviously, they need to be addressed, but if you're not careful, you'll become that plumber. You will, get too bogged down into the weeds. And if I look back in my career, I think earlier in my career, I would get stifled by support tickets. I think Brian mentioned it a little bit earlier, like, and that was also maybe what CSM used to be like the definition earlier. Um, and I would think, oh, I can't get to the strategic work until my queue is perfectly clean, until everything is working, that foundation's perfect. But I think that we need to evolve that and be comfortable with that maybe never being perfect or hire the plumber, delegate. And then when a situation arises where you have like a P1 ticket, being strategic is to turn that on its head and say, well, actually, I now have a seat at the table with these really senior people that are coming to me with the P1 ticket. And I can remind them that I'm the architect, remind them of this vision and where we're going and try to get their minds off all the tickets and the leaky plumbing per se.
Super great analogy. I love I love the analogy of the foundations and making sure that you kind of have those foundations in place to start with. I guess if a CSM were to come to you tomorrow and say like I want to be more strategic, but where do I start? And really all about kind of balancing that reactive with the strategic. What would you tell them?
I think, for me, it's you need to start really simply, like your book of business. Like, what's the shape of your book of business? Do you know how you're tiering your customers in order of priority? Like, what are their use cases? What are they trying to achieve? And then, like, if they've gone and done that, like, which is a decent exercise to go away and do that analysis, is like, write me a paragraph on what your job to be done is on this specific customer. Like, and then across tier one, tier two, tier three, like, how do you begin to make lower touch plays, higher touch plays, like knowing what you need to do practically as well. And then you can sit down with your CSM and then really work to that plan. But I think it needs to be on them to start with that really simple story about the shape of their book of business, the priorities, be that potential or revenue size, and then understanding what needs to be done in that account. So that would be always how I start, is that book of business story.
Yes, and I agree. And how I've applied that practically in the tiering is that, like, I like to think, okay, say tier one, tier two, tier three, the customers where I have a low ROI. So let's say for every email I send out, there's a lot of hand holding, there's a lot of selling, and I have to re-explain myself. And then even so, maybe it will take 10 emails before they will action one item. That kind of goes lower in my tiering. And until that person's at a maturity level, or they're ready in the business, or at the right levels of stakeholders, that they'll stay kind of in the tiering of where I will be more reactive. And that's a good use of my time. And that's being strategic of how I dedicate my resources and my headspace, so that the tier one customer is more that 1-to-1 ratio. For every email, I'm getting something back.
I love how ruthlessly you're thinking about that with a precious commodity like time. I think something that comes up a lot when we talk about being strategic is having a strategic mindset. How, and Katie, I'll come to you on this. How would you kind of describe the mindset differences of somebody with a strategic ability versus someone with less so of a strategic ability?
Sure. We said it's not being reactive. So a bit on the opposite end of that, it's being intentional and having a strong point of view, showing thought leadership. And I really think to get those skills, it begins with the weekly CSM team meeting. That is the testing in the playground where you can refine those skills, test your assumptions, and tease out your point of view with other CSMs, what they're seeing with their customers, the pulse of the industry. And I think that's just a quick win that we, as leaders, Brian, looking to you, we need to make sure that that is just a very healthy space to have good dialogue, challenge each other, friendly competition, and a safe place where any question can be asked.
Brian, no pressure. That Katie was throwing that one over
Wow.
to you. I
Knowledge bombs. Yeah, no, it's so I think that psychological safety thing is a point, because like, I don't think, people can improve without, straight dialogue and also straight answers. Like I think, me as a leader in this, world where it's just changed so much in the last 12 months in
Yeah.
how we're expected to operate and upskill. Like we also be honest with our teams that we don't have all the answers, and that actually we need to work together, and have that time to actually create that time to be strategic together, where we're going, we're going to extend the team meeting to 2 hours today to look at some problems we're facing commonly and work through that. So I love that from Katie. Like that openness as well is super important, especially from leadership. It's not about us dictating down. It's also about explaining what we don't know too.
a lot of what you've been both referencing is like the team and how the team comes together and the idea of having a point of view is interesting, right? Because it's maybe hard to teach that. So Brian, when you're hiring for somebody into your team, how do you actually assess whether somebody has that strategic capacity?
I think I look at three things on the soft skills side versus say the CV or the answers. And like I'm looking for curiosity, like are people asking questions, good questions? Do they have an interesting hobby? Like do they have the van and just head out to the desert and take photos? Like, people who are interested in the world around them. Then I look for high agency. So like they are people who are self-starters, very self-motivated, kind of get up and go. So the types of questions you might ask them in an interview are, what is something you've built at your company or what have you contributed to? And you're looking for I answers, not we did this or, I helped with that, but, I drove this, I saw a problem, this is what I did. And then I think that the last one, and I think this is such an underrated skill for anyone working in customer experience, is that kind of high level of self-awareness. So, if a meeting is going off track, can one of your team go, whoa, 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 stop? It's not going how we want it to go, like a renewal call or an SBR. Are they able to stand up and say to the customer, well, let's pause here, let's go over here and talk about that instead of just kind of rigidly following maybe the agenda? So I think those three things are kind of what I look for when I'm interviewing people.
Yeah, the idea of we definitely seen some of the best interviews have been the ones that haven't gone perfectly in a task stage, but someone said, "Hold on, I'm going to reset this
Yeah,
conversation," because that's real life, right?
exactly.
We've talked a lot about what strategic means, kind of how you build those habits. We've been kind of thinking about how do we find the right people that are strategic. But there's a lot of folks who aren't able to get there. There's like something blocking them. What are you guys' perspectives on why some CSMs aren't able to be strategic? What's maybe getting in the way? Katie, I'll come to you first.
Look, if you're going to put yourself out there and have a point of view, that can be scary, right? It can be met with resistance, challenge, disagreement. And so to be reactive, that's safe. So I would say it can be out of fear. And again, that's where I go to the team meeting because you can build the confidence through consensus and teasing out your ideas. But I think that's one way. And then another way is if people aren't planning for it. So you need to be intentional. Maybe that's having an hour on a Friday where you're thinking through your ideas on how to be strategic and not getting in the weeds of your inbox. Maybe it's 30 minutes after every call with a customer, pausing and instead of throwing off all the action items that can be very tactical, think about how is this tying into the bigger objectives and the value I bring. And not being as scared to use those I words. I like what Brian said. You need to be able to define the value, measure the value, communicate the value. And if you're using like a lot of we statements, then it's there's some ambiguity there, but what value you're bringing. So you are your own PR agent, and I think it's up to you to communicate that across to your clients.
Love that. Brian, what's your perspective here? What's blocking CSMs from being more strategic?
Yeah, I have a harsh take, which is like I think people need to look in the mirror. I think CSMs have been living relatively comfortably for a long time with the growth of SaaS. So most people, and I would say most people have been working in, double-digit growth companies, and they've been doing really well, maybe without commercial accountability as well, maybe without a number. Um, and as a relative newcomer to tech, I'm like, guys, you need to be hungrier. Like, you need to put in the work and really, really drive it. And as Katie says, make it that I word, push out of your comfort zone. But I think, in order to be strategic, it's not, you don't necessarily have to go and do a course. Like, I think it starts by looking in the mirror and going, yeah, I really want this. And I'm gonna put in the work and put myself out there and be brave.
Yeah, it's not much different than anything else you want in life, right? If you want to lose 10 pounds, if you want to plan for
Yeah.
retirement, you have to put the time aside. Otherwise, everyone else's priorities are going to take over.
I
Yeah.
can be, I'll be the first to admit it could be hard. Like, working with sales in particular, like who are our closest partners for the most part, you know, they're throwing stuff over the fence. It can be really tough to stand up for yourself. But I would always suggest that's the first place to start. Like, are you being a good partner to your salesperson, and that means standing up to them and like doing the right thing for the customer and the customer outcomes. So if you're going to start somewhere, I always think you can practice in a safe environment with your AE, and just be more bullish with them about what you want and what is strategic for the customers.
100%.
Fabulous. We've got a couple more questions and then we're going to open up to Q&A from the audience. So if you've got any questions, please do post them in the Q&A. I guess to kind of close us out here with these questions, we're talking a lot about all of the activity and driving towards kind of outcomes and also standing up for yourself, kind of painting yourself as that strategic partner. How do you measure if your strategic activity is actually working? What's the clue that it's going in the right direction, Brian?
I think for us, we've been very specific about it this year, and we're really pushing in-person meetings, like getting more than an hour on Zoom with a customer, like getting into their office, having the SBR in person, getting out for lunch. Like practically, we've increased our travel budgets this year to do that, to enable that. So there isn't an excuse for people not to do it. It's like get out to the customer, meet them in person, and really get after it. So out of the Zoom era into our in-person era is how we're looking at it.
Yeah, I think that meetings are really critical. And I mean, there's the obvious increase ARR, increase upsells, increase the pipeline. Those are the obvious ones, but I don't think we can underestimate the value of the in-person meetings. And now even more when I still think we struggle from post-COVID where it's harder than ever used to be to get those meetings. But if you're getting that second and third and fourth meeting, those are all really good KPI indicators. And recently I found too that, if you even get past the trust and the great relationship to even becoming friends with your customer, that is like the absolute cherry on the top.
Love that. We're going to open up to the audience questions. Katie, at the beginning of the call, you were talking around kind of priorities, and Jake had a question around how you make sure CSMs are aligned to the business priorities and company-wide strategic initiatives, and that's kind of staying at the core of the CSM's decision making and strategic decision making.
Sure. So by sometimes the business objectives that you have with your own company and your own org can be a bit different from what the customer is doing. But I presume you're talking about with the customer, and that goes back to that framework that we were talking about when it's a new relationship. It is good to set that out with like the account plan and align on that. But there's the danger if you are almost relying too much on that. And so you're asking like how do you tie into the business priorities? Personally, I have found they're changing much faster. So the things that we agree maybe in January has pivoted and changed a couple of times since then, whereas it was more static in the past. So I'm learning to be more nimble and okay with that. But then it's keep on each call, it's reiterating, okay, now this is our North Star, this is the commitment. So I think to answer your question, things are more dynamic now, and it's okay to play that back to your customer to make sure that you're aligned.
Super helpful. Something that we've not talked about so much is this idea that not all relationships start as super strategic, and sometimes you have to kind of change a relationship from being tactical into more strategic. We have a question in the chat around how can you be a strategic partner for a small business who maybe there's one person in role and they might not have time for
Yeah.
discussing strategy with you.
I love that question. It's very much, part of our journey over the last few years is like the people we speak to, like it's less than 5% of their job. So, it's really tough, first off. And then yeah, be more strategic. You can't just get them on more calls. What we found works really well is other customer case stories that you're able to package up in a really sexy one-pager way. A company like yours or a role like yours, an ICP like yours is seeing amazing success in this outcome by doing this with our product. And like beginning to give them these kind of like little tidbits without expectation that will actually help them see the value, or it's not necessarily thought leadership, but like even more practical than that. And then you can actually brick that up and you can send it across your book and you begin to get these small hits that you're then able to build a relationship from. But you do have to offer some value and it can be quite small, but it should be relevant.
I think on that, don't underestimate the starting small and the simple things. So, because these people that you're trying to connect with, there is that noise out there and they're being hit by all the other vendors, right? So you don't want to just be another really long email in the inbox, but if you can keep it very simple, hey, I've come across this that someone else is doing. We're doing it too with them, like anything that can help them with that journey. Maybe it's just a very quick nudge or example so that they know you're not going away. You're there to help. Your name is showing up in their inbox, but keeping it simple.
I think the risk we can fall into is trying to label everything as strategy with our customers, and that in itself might be a turn off. It's like I don't have time for strategy. But if you can understand a little bit about a problem you're trying to solve for a customer or a pain they have, and you can label the email or the meeting about solving that problem, much easier to get them on the call, much easier to get their time because they're interested in what you have to say. One of the kind of questions on the similar line here is, what about those customers that struggle to define value themselves? How can you start to deliver value to them if they don't actually know exactly how to articulate that themselves?
Yeah, we're practicing this at the moment, actually, really, really practically. And you have to help them, and I think that's through discovery. It's back to this kind of curiosity, and you're asking them layered questions. You're not stopping at one answer. So, like, what's trouble? Like, what in relation to your piece of software, whatever, is like what's causing you pain? Like, what is that pain? What's the implication of that pain? What happens if we don't solve it? Like, you have to keep digging all the way down, and sometimes they'll be answering that question for the first time out loud. And somewhere along, while you're staying patient and staying in that one spot and layering down, you'll have an aha moment with the customer where they go, "Wow, yeah, I didn't really know it had that much impact." And it could be on empowerment of their team, it could be on time, it could be on profile, it could be any number of things. But what you want to try and do then is connect it back to your software, to your product, and show them how they can benefit from using it.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for during this session. Katie, Brian, thank you so much for bringing your expertise and opinions to this group. I've one am taking a good few things away from this and really going to think about where I can apply some of what we've learned today. Everyone, thank you for joining and hopefully see you at the next monthly sync.
Thanks, KJ.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.